Start from the beginning.
We're going to talk more about early Buddhist women who were leaders. We were talking about that last week. Different women who became nuns. And we're drawing from an early book called the Therigatha, which are songs of the elders. And these were the elder nuns. So the Buddha created a spiritual path for women where they could also renounce the world and meditate, and they pretty much received the same instruction and everything. And many of them became teachers and counselors and arhats themselves, enlightened. And this is the book of kind of the realization poems of these women. In each of the poems, as I mentioned last week, had the backstory. And as I went through the rest of the book, the backstories really point out a couple things. One, the misogyny. The whole culture is so misogynistic. And as you know, for someone with a contemporary 21st century outlook, it's a bit hard to take. These women are so happy to get into become nuns because they're being they're basically otherwise slaves, either to husbands or out on the street making an income. And Buddhism itself is, I have to, among friends here, I have to say is quite misogynistic in the early days. And part of their misogynistic is not just that women are, they do believe women are equal and that they're equally capable of attaining enlightenment and all of that. But at the same time, there's this, they have a lot of the old chestnuts, like the idea woman is temptress, woman is someone who leads the monastic person off the way. And a lot of the monastic writings are again, really misogynistic. And they're trying to, keep their celibacy. And some of them had had lives where they were with women. And so they really go deep into, the how horrible the body is, how it's just a rotten sack of, all kinds of vile substances, and on and on and on in that vein. Well, that itself, denigrating the body is misogynistic, in my opinion. Women are the essence of body because they're the ones that give birth, and so body and women go quite together. And if the idea that bodies are in some way impure or that whole line of thinking is just problematic. Now, Tantra, of course, will put an end to that, but this is early Buddhism. So that's one of the things you get a strong take. And the women also are pretty good at defending themselves in terms of, getting autonomy within this new spiritual realm. So it's very exciting, as we said last week, that they're able to have a way to have some kind of space opened up for them to practice and to develop. So I want to talk about two different types of women tonight that I thought were very interesting as I read through the book. And the first is a group of women called Kala, Upakala, and Susupakala. And these are three sisters. And they became nuns because their older brother had become a monk. Their older brother happens to be Shariputra. So he's like Shariputra and Magdalena are like the two eldest monks in the Sangha next to the Buddha. And Shariputra is considered the foremost in wisdom. In fact, quite often in the Pali canon, Shariputra is giving Dharma talks with the Buddha sort of standing in the background saying, great Shariputra, you nailed it. And Shariputra is sort of becomes this, like Manjushri would later becomes kind of the embodiment of wisdom, at least in the early Buddhism. And as the women join up, The Sangha, their great line is, if Shariputra follows this path, it is no ordinary path. So it's because its wisdom itself has now turned to Buddhism, in a sense. And that's going to be very interesting in this particular reading that we're going to do, keeping in mind that the first poem that I'm going to read is by Kala, who's the oldest sister. So she's pretty much, the match for Shariputra. And you're going to see what the highest wisdom sounds like. So her poem goes like this, and these are poems where they're having this kind of dialogue with Mara, the tempter. So Kala says, I, a nun, trained and self-composed, established mindfulness, and entered peace like an arrow. The elements of body and mind grew still. Happiness came. Mara, who told you to shave your head? You look like a renunciate to me. Why do you practice this nonsense? Kala. And listen closely here. All those outside the way depend on views. They don't know the Dharma. They have no real understanding. But in the Shakya clan, the unrivaled Buddha was born. He taught me the way, the complete overcoming of views. Pain, the cause of pain, the end of pain, and the great eightfold way that stills all pain. When I heard his words, I rejoiced. The three knowledges had been realized, the Buddha's teaching had been done. Everywhere the love of pleasure is destroyed, the great dark is torn apart, and death, you too, are destroyed. Now I'm going to stop here because this is her song was quite remarkable because of the espousing the doctrine of no view. All those outside the way depend on views. They don't know the Dharma. They have no real understanding. But in the Shakya clan, the unrivaled Buddha was born. He taught me the way, the complete overcoming of views. So that is quite remarkable. And that goes back, this idea of no view. The highest view is no view, which of course is pretty much the essence of Dzogchen. That goes back to, it turns out, the earliest strata of the Pali Canon. So there are different parts of this, this Pali Canon has been getting written down for hundreds of years, and they feel that from the oldest part of it comes this teaching of the Buddha about there being, that the highest view is no view. So some scholars have argued that, well, this was perhaps the original teaching of the Buddha, that he originally taught, that simply to empty your mind and drop all views, as we teach in Dzogchen. And that this is sort of contrast to what later becomes associated with Hinayana in Abhidharma, which are, various kinds of concepts and categories and enumerations like the skandhas and the ayatanas and, everything that is actually mentioned in the Heart Sutra. So when you get back to Mahayana and in Prajna Paramita, it's a return to this primordial no view of the Buddha. That periodically in Buddhism, its original teaching is just no view, but then you get these elaborations and then you go back. So Prajna Paramita and the Heart Sutra, we say no eye, no ear, no toes, no tongue, and so on. No this, no that. All the Abhidharma categories are rejected again, and that's because Prajna Paramita is a teaching of no view. So the no view then, according to this line of thought, is actually the original teachings of the Buddha. Dzogchen is not some later, development, but it is this kind of return to the primordial and to the original Buddha mind. So in that vein, I thought, well, let's go back and just look at that early sutra, because there's just one sutra that, there may be more than one, but there's one particularly well-known one where the Buddha talks about no view, and this is on page 295 of the Sutta Nipada, which is one of the early collections. And it's called, there's these poems, and one's on the pure and one's on the supreme. And I'll just start reading here. One who is remote from all phenomena, from whatever is seen, heard, or sensed. How could anyone here in the world categorize him? That seer, behaving openly. They do not construct. They have no preferences. They do not assert. This is ultimate purity. Having loosened the knot of grasping that had been tied, they do not form desires for anything in the world. For a noble one who has transcended this boundary, who has known and seen, nothing is tightly grasped, not excited by lust or attached to dispassion. He does not grasp anything here as supreme. Settling on his own, as supreme among views, whatever a person esteems as best in this world in comparison, he says all others are inferior. Therefore, but this person has not transcended disputes. Whatever benefit one sees for oneself in the seen, the heard, the sensed, or in good behavior and observances, having grasped hold of that alone, one regards all else as inferior. The skilled speak of that as a knot, when one is attached and regards others as inferior. Therefore, a bhikshu should not be attached to the seen, to the heard, to the sensed, or to good behavior and observances. Nor should one construct any view in the world by means of knowledge or good behavior or observances, i.e. practice. One should not take oneself as equal or think of oneself as inferior or superior. Having abandoned what is taken up, not clinging, one does not create a dependency, even on knowledge. Not taking sides among those who are divided, one does not fall back on any view at all. For one who has no wish here or for either end, for various states of existence here or beyond, there are no places of residence at all, grasped after decided among teachings. Not even a subtle notion is formulated by him about what is seen, heard, or sensed here. How could anyone here in the world categorize him, that Brahman who does not cling to any view? They do not construct, they have no preferences. Even the teachings are not embraced by them. A noble one cannot be led by good behavior and observances. The impartial one gone beyond does not fall back. So that's pretty amazing. This, considering that's some of the earliest recorded teaching of the Buddha, this whole idea of no view.
Hey, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Do you think that's really real? That's not somebody's exaggerated fantasy of what they think something might be? I mean, I can't even imagine, because if you're not, it's actually, I actually can't really even imagine something like that. Not having, because you have to have a view. You're sitting caught in a body and you see things from a certain perspective. So I mean, so is having a description in your mind about what you see having a view, or does that simply mean you just constantly hang out in the place where you admit to yourself that you don't know what you're seeing, and you don't ever know what you're seeing? Or are you...
Well, yeah, that space, well, no, that would be a conceptual space too. It would be both of those spaces, the space where you think you know what you're seeing and the space where you think you don't know what you're seeing are both conceptual. They're both the idea is just to be present in the world with nothing on your mind. So in that case, the world and you is just all one, and so you're aware, you're present, you see, but you're not thinking about anything. So that's the idea of the no view, is that but there's two stages of that, if you will, and you kind of caught onto that. And one is there's this kind of complete no view where you're just empty mind. But then there's the kind of view which is where you have a little skepticism about your views, some irony about your views. So you have views, but you've experienced at some point non-view, complete non-view, but you still have a lot of views. But because you've experienced, even for a little bit, this really open space of no view whatsoever, you're able then to not take your beliefs so seriously. And the idea of not taking your beliefs seriously is hugely important. I mean, most of the problems in the world, and in this country particularly, are due to people who are like, seriously take your beliefs extremely seriously. So getting a little distance between you and your mental contents is the first part of it, and then dropping the mental contents, or at least thinning them out, the more advanced part of it.
It seems the key also is that the idea of not to fall back on, or depend. So if we can learn not to need that to stand on, if we don't need our beliefs to stand on, then we're free. But yet we can still have a view. I mean, it's not like we function without views. We just don't rely on them as an identity.
Yeah, we're aware of views. It's sort of, and that's also really the same approach that we take with the sensual world too, which is, I mean, if you really think, the interesting thing is the pairing, because if you have no view, you can't have the view that the body is bad in any way, right? Or that it's more virtuous to be, say, celibate than to not be celibate. Those sorts of things are definitely based on a particular, strong view.
Well, by view, they kind of mean dogma.
Yeah.
Or it includes dogma, for sure.
But just as, if you've never been out of the world of desire, then everything, you're just lost. But once you've experienced desirelessness, you can kind of go back and forth between desirelessness and desire. Similarly, when you've emptied your mind, which is pretty close to the same thing as being desireless, then you can go back and forth and you can entertain thoughts. It's because you're not bound by them as you once were. You're not chained to your thoughts. You're not chained to your desires. You have more creative play with your views and your beliefs and your desires and the world as a whole. All sorts of relations, things become possible.
So are they talking about people who are living in that state, or are they just talking about, I mean, that state of having no view would be a deep meditative state or something, or they're talking about people that are actually established in that state as their standard state?
Well, the woman who was singing, who recited her realization, he taught me the way, the complete overcoming of views. And so freedom is to be actually free of views. I've said this often, a Tulku Urchin quote, the quickest way to enlightenment, don't believe anything, or don't believe your thoughts. And that's actually, again, that idea of not believing your thoughts. Not so much that you don't have thoughts. I mean, but if you don't believe your thoughts, then thoughts are not a problem. They become part of the scenery. And when you go outside, you don't have to believe or not believe, what you're seeing as you walk down the street. It's just there. And similarly, the thoughts can be there, and as long as the scenery is not causing trouble, and the thoughts aren't causing trouble, then it's all just scenery. And the scenery is telling you something like what the weather's like, and so other stuff, and then your thoughts are telling you stuff too. And so it's it's just sort of general input. But that's when your mind. So in that sense, everything is happening, but you're not being caught by anything. Again, it's the idea of not being caught, not being attached, not leaving, not being stuck. So there's another part I was going to read. There's a very interesting chapter in the book called Nuns and Nature. And he's going to talk about two nuns and their relationship to trees, which of course I'm collecting tree lore for a new book. And then he's going to talk about nuns and the moon. And there's also a sort of relationship between trees and the moon too, which is very interesting. But first, there's this wonderful story of the Buddha and a tree spirit, which I have to read because it's just very sweet. After the teacher had given permission to the Sangha of monks to lodge outside the walls of a monastery, a certain monk decided to build himself a lodging, and seeing a tree that suited him, began to cut it down. Thereupon a certain spirit who had been reborn in that tree and who had an infant child appeared before the monk carrying her child on her hip and begged him not to cut down the tree, saying, "Master, do not cut down my home." But the monk said, "I shall not be able to find another tree like this," and paid no further attention to what she said. So here you already get a sense the monk is going to be the blockhead in this story here. The tree spirit thought to herself, "If he but look upon this child, he will desist," and placed the child on a branch of the tree. The monk, however, had already swung his axe, was unable to check the force of his upraised axe, and cut off the arm of the child. Furious with anger, the tree spirit raised both her hands and exclaimed, "I will strike him dead." And a tree spirit could well do that. In an instant, however, she thought came to her, "This monk is a righteous man. If I kill him, I'll go straight to hell. Moreover, if other tree spirits see monks cutting down their own trees, they will say to themselves, 'Such and such a tree spirit killed a monk under such circumstances, and will follow my example and kill other monks. Besides, this monk has a master. I will therefore content myself with reporting the matter to his master.' Lowering her upraised hand, she went weeping to the teacher, who is the Buddha, And having saluted him and stood on one side, and the Buddha said, "What is the matter, tree spirit?" And the tree spirit replied, "Reverend sir, your disciple did this and that to me. I was sorely tempted to kill him, but I thought this and that, refrained from killing him, and came here." So saying, she told him the story of all the details. When the Buddha heard her story, he said to her, well done, spirit. You have done well in holding in, like a swift speeding chariot, your anger which was aroused." So saying, he pronounced the following verse, and the Buddha says, "Whoever controls his anger like a swift speeding chariot when it is aroused, him I call a charioteer. Other folks are merely holders of reins." At the conclusion of the lesson, the tree spirit was established in the fruit of conversion. The assembled company also profited by this. So she converts to Buddhism, hearing the Buddha. And when you convert to Buddhism, then you gain the fruit of conversion, your first kind of stage of awakening. But even after the tree spirit had obtained the fruit of conversion, she stood weeping before the Buddha, and the Buddha asked her, "What is the matter, tree spirit?" "Reverend sir," she replied, "my home has been destroyed. What am I to do now?" Said the teacher, "Enough, tree spirit, be not disturbed. I will give you a place of abode." With these words, he pointed out near the perfumed chamber of Jetavana a certain tree which a tree spirit had departed on the previous day, and said, "In such and such a place is a tree which stands by itself. Enter therein." Accordingly, the tree spirit entered that tree. Therefore, because the tree spirit had received her place of abode as a gift from the Buddha, although spirits of great power approached the tree, they were unable to shake it. The Buddha took this occasion to lay down and enjoy a new rule to the Sangha, and that is, there will be no more injuring of plants and trees. So when we read the rules of the monks, we talked about that monks can't injure plants or trees, and they have no reason to do so because they're begging and so forth. And that's the backstory of how that rule came to be. So there's a particular nun that she includes in the book called Soma, which is always an auspicious name. Soma being the like reader ambrosia, what the immortals drink to stay immortal. So Soma is the daughter of a minister of the king, and she becomes a lay person, and at some point she decides to become a nun. And she uttered her poem when one day she went out to sit beneath a tree and meditate. And then the person writing explains, in India, the earliest form of temple or place or worship was the tree. Originally, there was no temple built to gods. Huge shady trees were supposed to be abodes of some unseen power or god. As she was sitting under the tree, Mara appeared and spoke the poem's first stanza. So this is one of these kind of almost like replicating the Buddha. She's under the great tree meditating, and Mara is going to come and test her. So Mara says, that place the sages gain is hard to reach. A mere woman can't get there. And Soma answers, what harm is it to be a woman when the mind is concentrated and the insight is clear? If I ask myself, am I or a woman or a man in this, then I would be speaking Mara's language. Everywhere the love of pleasure is destroyed, the great dark is torn apart, and death, you too, are destroyed. So I thought that was a great rejoinder to Mara. If I think of myself as a man or a woman, then I'm speaking your language. That's duality is the language of Mara. Discrimination is the language of Mara. So that was the nuns and trees. And then there's this fascinating one about the nuns and the moon. So both the trees and the moon are preeminent kind of symbols of cyclical reality and cyclical powers. So the moon governs the rhythms of life and the cycles of life, and trees are, of course, the preeminent earthly nourishers of the rhythms of life. So this kind of cyclical power that's contained within things like trees and the moon govern things like tides and growth and fertility, rain, and also human destiny, all things that change over time. Now, contrast to that, when the Buddha arrives, he's seen as a solar hero and this kind of reassertion of the masculine principle, what I call the vertical. So the horizontal, as I've often said, is, cyclical. And it's the cycle of the season. But the vertical is like the sun, and the sun is not cyclical. The sun is always the same, always bright. So in India, you have, in fact, because it's very patriarchal there, the Buddha appears as a solar hero, a patriarch, and there's become sort of a discussion of the path of the moon and the path of the sun. And the path of the moon is after you die, your spirit goes to the moon, and there it awaits rebirth. So the moon is the home of the ancestors. And what happens though is you die and you go to the moon, and then you come back, and then you die and you come back, and you die and you come back, and on and on and on. But if you are a follower of the path of the sun, when you go past the moon and you're reborn in the higher spheres, and you're completely liberated, you go on the path of the sun, which is the end of rebirth. Because the moon is the governing 6 cycles, and one of the cycles is life and death over and over and over again. Well, what the nuns do is that they reinterpret the mythology, which is always legitimate. And so in their they don't want to actually be solar heroes, which is a very masculine, paternalistic thing. So they're going to actually set the idea of the moon as the symbol of enlightenment. But it's not the cyclical moon, it's the full moon. So enlightenment is not like the sun, enlightenment is like the full moon. It clarifies everything. So you get both the lunar and the feminine, and so the feminine has its own wisdom, its own awareness, its own unchanging quality. So it's not the waxing and waning moon, but the full moon that becomes the symbol of enlightenment in the poetry of the nuns. So she quotes several lines from some of these songs of the nuns, such as, "Be like the moon, a fortnight old, in a cloudless sky." That is, be like the full moon. "He goeth over the world, a radiant shedding as when a moon comes free in a cloudy sky. The round of life renewed has ceased, and naught the clinging doth remain, even as the moon on the 15th day sails in a clear sky without a stain." So the full moon, that everything dominates the sky, is the enlightenment realization of these women.
And I'm just going to interject. Tonight is the 15th day full moon.
Oh, I thought it was yesterday. I looked out the train windows. I was coming back from Chicago, and the moon was quite full. It was quite pretty.
Um,
So there's a few more moon poems here. This one's by Muda, whose name means free woman, enlightened woman. And her poem is, Muda, free woman to be free, as the moon is free from the eclipse of the dragon Rahu's dark jaws. With a free mind and no debt, enjoy what has been given to you, this alms food. And another poem, Kuna be filled with all good things like the moon on the 15th day, completely, perfectly full of wisdom. Tear open the massive dark. So that's Women in the Moon. I thought so. It's very fascinating that we see both the feminine side of this kind of development of feminine wisdom early on, and also the idea of the highest wisdom being the wisdom of no view. The fact that Shariputra's sister is proclaiming the wisdom of no view, this idea then of the women creating this kind of feminine imagery, because the moon as a symbol of enlightenment, the full moon, it has both a coolness and a brightness. So there's both the compassion and the clarity. Now, in the tropical climates like India and say, Southwest in California right now, the sun is not their friend. When it's sunny and it's 120 degrees, the sun is not your friend. The sun is relentless, brutal. I can tell you, well, y'all live in Kansas, you know what a brutal sun is like. And so that's why this idea that it's not just, brute discipline and male ardor that makes the path, but this, we're starting to get to this idea of feminine energy, that you need compassion and coolness as well as brightness, and that makes a complete awakening.
So I was thinking that there's still, first I thought there might be still some kind of dualism in there, like that the sun and the full moon are both expressions of light, like versus dark, darkness. But then maybe that the full moon is kind of more aligned with the middle way, because it's the fullness of light and within in the darkness, in a sense. But is there so then, like, what is the role of just darkness in a non-dual understanding? Because you can do dark retreat or stare into the darkness, or it's actually quite, luminous and vibrant in a way.
Well, actually, the dark retreat would not be a good example of darkness, because you're not going in it for the darkness, you're going in for the visions. You're going in to pull light out of that darkness.
Yeah.
And you're, the light of another world, actually, is what you're going to pull out of that darkness. Not this world, but a visionary world. So yeah, no, it's we're creatures of the light. The darkness doesn't have any. Not that it's we're opposed to it, that it's evil. It's more like in Platonism. It's nothing. It's like it doesn't have any particular quality. It doesn't really. It just is a counterweight. And I can't think of any time Buddhism has any kind of celebration of the dark. I don't know. Does Buddhism ever celebrate the dark? I guess it sometimes. The Tibetans celebrate everything. So yeah, you get even when you get black deities, it doesn't quite. It's not real darkness. It's more a sense of power. That there's power in the darkness, or power in wrath. Speaking of which, I got a book today that I'm looking forward to read called "The Forest and the Sea" by Marston Bates. It was one of the early books on ecology written in the 1960s. And he was a person who had studied forests. He had actually wrote a book on the mosquito, natural history of mosquitoes, and tied mosquitoes to many diseases, which led to them being medicines being developed and so forth. He was worked a lot in tropical forests. And he wrote in the book "The Forest and the Sea," which there was a passage I was looking for what he had to say about hardwood forests, which I happen to have and studying. And he was describing how the great in the natural world before man, that all of that Europe, Central Europe, and England, and Eastern North America and China were all huge forests. But that in Europe and China, except for the southwest part of China, Sichuan, those hardwood forests had long been brought under the cultivation of man. And mostly that was true in North America, with a few exceptions here and there. And then he was describing, he says, you have to understand, what it was like in the forests when they were big like that. And that they were dark. They read descriptions about people who first came to America, and they're walking through the forest, and there's not a lot of, there's light in the forest, but it's always shaded and a little on the dark side. But there's no undergrowth in the old forests in America, because the canopy covers everything that no underbrush grows. The trees are so big and they cover so thoroughly that you can walk through the forest with no underbrush and you can see forever in the forest. So that was something that they noted. The other interesting thing, and ties it to our story here, is that the early forests, the primordial forests, are completely silent. There are no birds. In the daytime, that is, they're silent in the daytime. Birds don't live in the middle of these big forests. They live on the edges of forests and in fields and by rivers and where there's some light and stuff. Songbirds don't live in the forest. Actually, there are birds that live in the forest: owls, ravens, eagles, and other kinds of somewhat predatory birds, hawks and stuff. So he says the forest during the day is very quiet, but at night it's ferocious. The noises are everywhere. Of course, you remember this forest is going to be really dark at night, because even if the moon is out, it's not going to get into this dark forest, right? So he says, the owls are hooting and the everything shrieking, and there's all sorts of sounds. He describes all these different sounds, and then of course you've got wolves in the forest, you've got pumas in the forest, all these kinds of animals that are no longer around, and he says, and the pumas were the worst. He said, a puma screaming at night sounds like a very vocal baby being slowly murdered.
Oh my god. Oh my god. That's horrendous. Oh my god.
So that's darkness.
Yeah, no thanks.
Silent during the day, but nighttime. That's the night side of the primordial. Screeching pumas.
So the monks were going out there during the day and scooting along when the night came.
Well, I think the forests that they were in were not primordial. They weren't deep in the forest there. India was fairly well settled. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was forested, but And I suppose there are places where you can go where there would be very wilderness, but they were begging, so they tended to hang near town. So they're just they're kind of on the forest edge, really.
Songbirds.
They're not dwellers of the deep forest, although I suppose that I don't know that. And the forests in India always sound like, well populated, sort of like northern Wisconsin. I mean, you go in there and there's under every other tree. I mean, again, they're kind of, there's all these people wandering around meditating in the forest. So it's not quite like that deep one. The place they would go for their deep meditations they never seem to go into that primal forest. So I think that would be interesting. Maybe I'll find something where they do. But if they want to go on the dark side, they'll go to a cemetery and meditate. And it's very advised for monks to go to the cemetery. Of course, they're letting the bodies, the charnel ground, so you get to watch your body in various states of decomposition. And you could, but you can do that out of nature too. You don't actually have to go. Again, as an advocate of forest, animals are dying in forests all the time, and they take a while. They're pretty quick to get. We had a raccoon die in ours. So when we first go out there, we look at it, and it was sort of freshly dead. We had to chase the vultures, flew away from it as we got there, and the thing was, it was kind of. Its guts were all torn open and everything. It was quite a sight. And Terry about gagged on that. And she wouldn't go back until I assured her that the raccoon had disappeared. She wanted me to bury it. But I said, well, no need for that. A few days later I went back and no trace of it. Maybe a few hairs on the ground.
Well, it's like that deer that was at your old house by that second fire pit.
Yeah, he was a chance to meditate on the decomposition of. Although I didn't really do that because I don't meditation I'm interested in. You can definitely have opportunities for it. I mean, nature is a charnel ground, and a primordial forest, an old growth forest like what I have a patch of, some that's never been touched. It's that old stuff. That's particularly a charnel ground because trees are falling over all the time and rotting on the ground. So there's a lot of dead trees and a lot of dead trees on the ground and dead trees standing up. And I mean, when you look at it, it doesn't look good because you're used to these kind of Disneyland forests, or parks. And an old growth forest doesn't look like that at all. It's kind of messy looking because there's a lot of death going on. So it's certainly a tree charnel ground, a tree burial ground. And that's what makes them, that's how they nourish themselves because those trees break down and they energize the soil and such. So, and it provides habitat for zillions of creatures and so forth. A forest at night is a scary place. I mean, I spent a few nights out in the forest, and I know, Joe, you did a retreat in my forest. And my forest was the forest in Kansas was hardly a deep and dark forest. But even so, just to go out by yourself alone at night in a forest, particularly nowadays when we're so used to being urban and inhabitants, it would be about as scary as, even though we don't have screaming panthers. We have a range of imaginations, and that's enough. Even now, even owning this land, I have not gone out there to stay overnight. I have to build my confidence up before I do that. Also, usually you wait till after it frosts, so there's not any less creeping things too. tree to camp. But even in your, there's not so much, so they don't like dark forests, but what they would really like is they'd like a forest that, got some open spots so that you can get under your big tree and have a good shot at the moon. And then you're ready to meditate.
Yep. Under the tree, let's see the moon.
So, but the Buddha's enlightenment was nighttime under a tree, right? It was all night.
The Buddha was a night meditator, right? Yeah, there's a whole tradition of night meditation and scattered throughout Buddhism. I also have a book, like in my antique collection, like from the 1800s, called a big thick one called Night Vigils with the Bible Illustrated. And somebody had gone all the way through the Old and New Testament and times where various religious figures spent all night praying or meditating, and we got enough to get a pretty good book. With beautiful illustrations of the moon and people meditating at night. Of course, in that part of the world, that would be really by far the best time to meditate because it's cool at night.
Oh.
You're in Egypt or Palestine. You're gonna want to. You either get up very early in the morning or meditate at night.
Once when I was, am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I was about 8 years old, so that would have been back in the mid-'60s, and we were driving through the Black Forest in Germany, and this was, of course, way before Chernobyl, and we stopped by the side of the road, and I wandered off into the forest, and it was like what you described, Bruce, where it was an old forest where there was just a canopy and there wasn't very little undergrowth. And of course it was all pine trees, so that you were walking on, who knows how deep those pine needles went. And by the time I was about 20 feet from the road, I had perfect view of my family putting out the little lunch baskets and having a picnic. I couldn't hear a thing at all from them. It was completely silent. And I wandered back a little further. I kept going deeper in, just kind of keeping an eye on them. And there was a tiny little brook that was running at one point, and if I was 2 feet away from it, I couldn't hear it. It was absolutely one of the most amazing experiences of my life, was being in that forest. And I got really clear where the German forest fairy tales come from. It was really intense. It was really attractive, but it was really, it felt really attractive and really dangerous at the same time.
That's interesting.
Really easy, very easy to get lost and disoriented because you didn't have light, and you didn't have horizons, and you didn't have sound. And so I went and hung around for 15 minutes and ran back to the car.
Is the lack of sound due to just the wind doesn't penetrate in there, or what?
Well, it happened. I'm sure if it was windy, there would have been the sound of trees moving, but the lack of sound of there wasn't any other sound but what I could hear my footfall making. There wasn't, like I said, and the sound was so absorbed by the pine needles that I stumbled across a stream and then stepped away from it, and I just deliberately got, okay, how far away do I get before I don't know that stream is there. It is literally 2 feet. And I couldn't hear the stream. Sound got absorbed so completely, so immediately.
Pine needles. I imagine the pine, if you got a few feet of pine needle, that would just be like it would get broken up, wouldn't it?
Exactly. I mean, there could have been 10 feet of pine needles. I mean, this is, the Black Forest is a fairly, at that point, I don't think it is anymore because I think it got largely damaged by Chernobyl. But yeah, I mean, those were really, really, really old trees and been sitting there dropping pine needles for a really, really long time, hundreds of years.
Wow.
Yeah, I could see doing a retreat in a place like that. Boy, it would be very intense.
Uh-huh. Well, the forest has all sorts of great symbolism as I'm discovering it, as I said, not just being in one, but also reading about them. And it's sort of the antithesis of civilization. It's uncultivated. It's everything takes care of itself, so it's man. The whole human world is a world of cultivation. So to go into the forest is to go back to the uncultivated. So again, it's this idea of going back to the origin, to the primordial, and at the same time, you can't live in the primordial in a certain sense. You can sort of take the realization you gain in the primordial back into the world, but as a day-to-day life, one can't stay there.
So is that like that? There's symbolism even in the way that the monks and nuns, they meditated on the edge of the forest and they lived on the edge of the towns, and they were edge people.
Edge dwellers. Yes, very good. There's a quote from the Dhammapada. Forests are sweet, for the world does not enter them. There the sage may find rest. In China, they would build their temples in forests, and particularly on mountains. So the 5 sacred mountains of China all have forests on top, and that's the power of the mountain, is its forest in their view, because it's the forest that's actually calls down rain and calls down the blessings of heaven. So, and in fact, biologically, the forests do that. They're setting up water vapor at a huge rate. So they are creating the rain, because they're the ones setting up they're evaporating water, and then it comes back in the form of rain. So the forests give to heaven, and heaven returns it with blessing, and rain is the blessing. So this concept of trees being linked to the kind of opening up, and then down from heaven comes blessing, comes Adhisthana. Well, thank you all for joining me.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
And we will talk again next week.
Okay.
All right, see you later.
See you.
By the merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrong from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara.
May I have free and peace. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Have a good week.
Good night.
Right.